I pulled into my gravel driveway at Lake Martin, Alabama, after 3 weeks working a federal task force operation in Birmingham, and immediately noticed my cabin's front door was painted a different color, some garish coral shade that made my stomach drop. My name is Scott Novak, and I've been a detective with the Russell County Sheriff's Department for 12 years. I bought this lakeside cabin 4 years ago as a weekend retreat, a place to fish and decompress from the stress of the job. The property sat on 2 acres of wooded land with direct water access, about 40 minutes from my apartment in Phoenix City. I'd specifically chosen a place outside any HOA jurisdiction, or so I thought when I signed the papers back in 2022. I got out of my truck and walked toward the door, noticing new landscaping around the front tacky ceramic gnomes and a ridiculous wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Paradise," in cursive letters. This wasn't my style at all. My key slid into the lock, turned halfway, then stopped. Someone had changed my locks. "Can I help you?" a shrill voice called from inside my own house. I stepped back, hand instinctively moving toward my hip where my service weapon rested. "This is my property. Who's in there?" The door swung open to reveal a woman in her mid-50s with an aggressive blonde bob haircut and wearing a velour tracksuit that screamed suburban soccer mom. She held a glass of what looked like white wine and stared at me with the kind of entitled expression I'd seen on criminals who genuinely believed they'd done nothing wrong. "Excuse me, but this property is now under HOA management due to violations of community standards," she announced, taking a sip of her wine. "I'm Brenda Matthews, president of the Lake Martin Shores Homeowners Association, and you are trespassing." I took a deep breath, trying to process what I was hearing. "Madam, I own this cabin. I have the deed. There is no HOA here. This property has never been part of any homeowners association." Brenda rolled her eyes dramatically. "Well, that changed 6 months ago when the county approved our expansion. All properties within a half-mile of the lake are now part of Lake Martin Shores HOA. You would know this if you bothered to attend community meetings or respond to our certified letters." I never received any certified letters, and even if there is an HOA now, which I seriously doubt, that doesn't give you the right to break into my house and change my locks, she pursed her lips. "We didn't break in. We used our emergency access rights under HOA, Bylaws Section 12, subsection 4. Your property was in violation of no fewer than 17 community standards, including peeling paint, overgrown vegetation, and an unapproved dock extension. After 60 days of non-compliance, the HOA has the right to remedy the situation and bill the homeowner." My jaw clenched. "Get out of my house right now. I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying here temporarily while overseeing the renovation work. The contractors will arrive tomorrow morning to complete the exterior painting and landscaping corrections." I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the sheriff's department right now." Brenda laughed. Actually laughed. "Go ahead. I have all the paperwork. Everything we've done is completely legal according to HOA regulations." I dialed the non-emergency number and explained the situation to the dispatcher, who recognized my name immediately. She said she'd send a deputy out right away. While waiting, I walked around the perimeter of my cabin, documenting everything with my phone camera. The new paint job, the changed locks, the ridiculous decorations that looked like they belonged in a retirement community in Florida, not a rustic Alabama lake cabin. Deputy Marcus Chen arrived 20 minutes later. I'd worked with Marcus on several cases over the years. He was a solid cop, thorough and fair. "Scott, what's going on?" Marcus asked as he approached. I explained the situation while Brenda stood on my front porch, arms crossed, looking smug. Marcus turned to her. "Madam, can I see this paperwork you mentioned?" She disappeared inside and returned with a thick folder. Marcus flipped through it, his expression growing more skeptical with each page. "This says the HOA was established in January of this year, and all property owners were notified by certified mail in February." "I never received anything," I said firmly. Marcus continued reading. "It also says that after 3 violation notices went unanswered, the HOA board voted to take corrective action on the property." "Let me see that," I said. Marcus handed me the folder. The address on the certified mail receipts was wrong. They'd sent everything to 4157 Lakeshore Drive instead of 4157 Lakeshore Lane. My property was on Lane, not Drive. "These were sent to the wrong address. None of this is valid." Brenda snatched the folder back. "That's your problem, not ours. You should have updated your address with the county. My address with the county is correct, I shot back. This is your error, which means none of these notices were properly served. Marcus looked uncomfortable. Madam, if the notices were sent to the wrong address, then the homeowner never had a proper opportunity to respond. I'm going to have to ask you to vacate the property. Absolutely not. I've invested HOA funds into correcting these violations. We're not leaving until the work is complete and Mr. Novak reimburses the association for our expenses. How much are we talking about? I asked. Brenda smiled like a shark. $37,000 so far. $37,000? For what? Paint and some garden gnomes? For paint, professional landscaping, lock replacement with HOA, master key compatibility, deep cleaning services, pest control, and my administrative time overseeing the project. Marcus cleared his throat. Madam, regardless of the HOA bylaws, you're currently occupying someone else's property without their permission. That's trespassing. You need to leave now, or I'll have to place you under arrest. Brenda's face turned red. This is harassment. I'm going to file a complaint with your supervisor and sue both of you personally. Do you know who my husband is? Gerald Matthews, senior partner at Matthews & Associates. We'll bury you in legal fees. I'd had enough. Deputy Chen, I want to press charges for trespassing, breaking and entering, and whatever else applies here. Brenda's confidence finally cracked a bit. You can't do that. I have authorization from the HOA board. Marcus shook his head. Madam, even if the HOA bylaws are legitimate, which is questionable given the addressing error, you still can't just move into someone's house. That's not how any of this works. I'm going to need you to gather your belongings and leave the premises immediately. My things are unpacked. I need time. You have 30 minutes, Marcus said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Brenda huffed and stomped back inside. I could hear her on the phone, presumably calling her lawyer husband, her voice rising in pitch as she complained about the injustice of the situation. This is insane, I muttered to Marcus. Welcome to the weird part of property law, he replied. I've seen HOAs do some crazy stuff, but moving into someone's house is a new one. While Brenda packed, I called a locksmith. Thank goodness for 24-hour emergency services. The locksmith, a guy named Dave who'd done work for the sheriff's department before, said he could be there within the hour. Brenda emerged exactly 30 minutes later, dragging a suitcase and carrying a designer purse that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. This isn't over, Mr. Novak. You owe the HOA $37,000, and we will collect through liens, legal action, and whatever other means necessary. Send me a proper invoice with itemized expenses to my correct address, I said. My lawyer will review it. She loaded her suitcase into a white Mercedes SUV and drove off, tires spitting gravel. Marcus and I watched her go. You want me to file a report? Marcus asked. Absolutely. I want everything documented. We went inside together. The interior of my cabin looked like it had been taken over by someone with the decorating taste of a department store display. Everything was beige and coral, with live laugh, love signs scattered around. My fishing trophies had been packed away, and my comfortable leather furniture was covered with floral slipcovers. The kitchen counters, which I'd left clean but lived in, now displayed decorative jars filled with fake lemons and ridiculous signs about wine o'clock. Marcus took photos while I checked every room. In my bedroom, I found that Brenda had been sleeping in my bed, her toiletries spread across my bathroom counter. The guest room had been converted into some kind of office with HOA files and a laptop setup. She'd really moved in like she owned the place. This is breaking and entering at minimum, Marcus said. Probably burglary too, since she was living here. What about the lock change? That's vandalism, destruction of property. And if she was actually residing here, we could argue residential burglary, which is a felony. The locksmith arrived and got to work replacing the locks while Marcus finished his report. By midnight, I had new keys in a house that smelled like someone else's perfume. I spent the next hour ripping off slipcovers and taking down the awful decorations, stuffing everything into garbage bags. I barely slept that night, too angry and wired from the situation. At 6 a.m, I started making phone calls. First to my lawyer, Jim Hendricks, who I'd worked with on various legal matters over the years. Scott, it's 6 a.m, Jim answered groggily. I've got a situation. I explained everything that had happened. Jim whistled low. Okay, that's actually insane. First thing, we need to verify if this HOA is even legitimate. Second, even if it is, they absolutely cannot just enter your property and change your locks. That's criminal. Third, the notice issue is huge. If they sent everything to the wrong address, none of their actions have legal standing. What do I do? I'll file for an emergency restraining order this morning to keep them away from your property. Then we'll request all documentation about this HOA formation, meeting minutes, everything. If they're claiming you owe them money, they'll have to prove every penny in court, and I guarantee their numbers won't hold up. I'll also contact the district attorney about the criminal charges. Thanks, Jim. One more thing, don't communicate with this Brenda woman directly. Everything goes through me from now on. After hanging up with Jim, I called my supervisor, Captain Richards, and explained why I needed a few personal days to deal with the situation. Are you serious? Richards said. Someone from an HOA moved into your house. I'm completely serious. Deputy Chen took the report last night. I need to handle this before it gets worse. Take the time you need. And Scott, make sure she gets charged. People can't just do whatever they want because they're on some neighborhood board. The morning brought more chaos. At 8:30, a landscaping crew showed up with equipment, saying they had a job scheduled at this address. I met them in the driveway. Who hired you? The crew chief, a weathered man in his 60s, checked his clipboard. Lake Martin Shores HOA. We're supposed to remove several trees, install new flower beds, and put in a stone pathway. Well, I'm the property owner, and I never authorized this work. The HOA has no authority to hire you to work on my property. He frowned. We were already paid a 50% deposit, $5,000. That's between you and the HOA. I'm telling you right now, if you touch anything on this property, I'll have you arrested for trespassing and vandalism. The crew chief made a phone call, presumably to Brenda, and I could hear her screeching through the phone even from several feet away. He hung up looking frustrated. She says we need to complete the work or she'll sue us for breach of contract. And I'm telling you that I'm a law enforcement officer and the property owner, and if you start work here, you'll be charged criminally. Your choice. The crew packed up and left. 10 minutes later, my phone rang from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mr. Novak, this is Gerald Matthews, Brenda's husband. I understand there's been some confusion. There's no confusion. Your wife broke into my house, changed my locks, and was living here illegally. The HOA has legal authority to correct violations. All of this is spelled out in the bylaws. The bylaws that I never received because your wife sent the notices to the wrong address. Those bylaws? There was a pause. We have return receipts showing delivery to the wrong address. And even if you had the right address, no HOA bylaw allows someone to move into my house. That's breaking and entering, burglary, and about 5 other crimes. Gerald's tone hardened. We're prepared to file a lien against your property for the expenses already incurred. If you don't pay, we'll force a sale. Good luck with that. My attorney will be in touch. I hung up and immediately called Jim back to let him know about the contact. He reminded me not to answer any more calls from the Matthews family or anyone associated with the HOA. Over the next few days, things escalated. I returned to my apartment in Phoenix City, but drove out to the cabin each evening to make sure no one was messing with my property. On the 3rd day, I found a lien notice attached to my front door, claiming I owed the HOA $42,000. The amount had grown by $5,000 in just 3 days. Jim filed our motion for a restraining order and included all the evidence of the fraudulent addressing, improper notice, and criminal trespass. We also filed a formal complaint with the Alabama Real Estate Commission about the HOA's practices. The hearing for the restraining order was scheduled for the following Tuesday in Russell County Circuit Court. I took the day off and met Jim at the courthouse at 8 in the morning. Brenda showed up with her husband Gerald and another lawyer from his firm, a severe-looking woman in her 40s named Patricia Holbrook. They sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, Brenda shooting daggers at me with her eyes. Judge Morrison, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who I'd testified before on several cases, called the hearing to order. Jim presented our case first, walking through the timeline of events, the addressing error, the break-in, and Brenda's occupation of my property. Your Honor, this isn't a case of HOA overreach, Jim argued. This is criminal trespass, breaking and entering, and harassment. Mrs. Matthews had no legal right to enter my client's home, change his locks, or reside there. Even if the HOA bylaws were properly served, which they weren't, no HOA has the authority to essentially steal someone's home. Judge Morrison looked at the evidence, including the photos I'd taken and Deputy Chen's report. Then she turned to the defense. Patricia stood. Your Honor, the Lake Martin Shores HOA was properly established through county approval in January of this year. All property owners within the designated area were notified by certified mail. Mr. Novak's property fell into violation of numerous community standards. After proper notice and opportunity to cure, the HOA exercised its right to remedy the violations. The notices were sent to the wrong address, Judge Morrison said, reading from the file. How is that proper notice? The address we used was the address on file with the county tax assessor. Jim stood. Your Honor, I have the documentation from the county tax assessor right here. My client's property address is correctly listed as 4157 Lakeshore Lane. The HOA sent notices to Lakeshore Drive, a different street entirely. This was their error, not my client's. Judge Morrison reviewed the documents, her expression growing stern. Mrs. Holbrook, your client sent notices to the wrong address, then entered Mr. Novak's property without permission, changed his locks, and took up residence in his home. How do you possibly justify that? Patricia shifted uncomfortably. The HOA acted in good faith based on the information they had. Good faith doesn't include moving into someone else's house, Judge Morrison said sharply. She turned to Brenda. Mrs. Matthews, did you actually stay overnight in Mr. Novak's cabin? Brenda stood, trying to look dignified. Yes, Your Honor. I was overseeing the renovation work. It was more efficient to stay on site. Did you have Mr. Novak's permission to be on his property? The HOA bylaws give us access for enforcement purposes. That's not what I asked. Did you have the property owner's permission to enter his home and stay there? Brenda hesitated. The HOA board voted to authorize the action. Judge Morrison leaned back in her chair. I'm going to make this very clear. I don't care what your HOA bylaws say. You cannot enter someone's private residence, change their locks, and live there without their permission. That's illegal. The fact that you hold a position in a homeowners association doesn't give you immunity from the law. She signed the restraining order. Mrs. Matthews, you and any representatives of the Lake Martin Shores HOA are prohibited from entering, contacting, or interfering with Mr. Novak's property in any way. This order is effective immediately and remains in place pending a full hearing on the legitimacy of the HOA's actions. Violation of this order will result in arrest. Brenda's face went pale, then red. Your Honor, this is... Are we clear, Mrs. Matthews? Yes, Your Honor, Patricia interjected quickly, putting a hand on Brenda's arm. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. Mr. Novak has every right to press charges for trespassing and breaking and entering at minimum. As we left the courtroom, I could hear Brenda arguing with her husband and their lawyer. Jim pulled me aside in the hallway. That went about as well as we could have hoped, he said. Now we need to focus on getting that fake lien removed and going after them for damages. What about criminal charges? That's up to the DA, but based on Judge Morrison's comments, I'd say Brenda is in serious trouble. I drove back to the cabin feeling vindicated, but still angry about the whole situation. When I arrived, I found that someone had spray-painted HOA violator across my garage door in bright red letters. I took photos and called the sheriff's department again. This time, a different deputy responded, a young guy named Travis who seemed eager but inexperienced. I explained the restraining order and showed him the vandalism. Do you know who did this? Travis asked. I'm guessing someone from the HOA, but I can't prove it. I want it documented. He took photos and filed a report. You might want to install security cameras. Already ordered them, I said. In fact, I'd ordered a complete security system after the hearing, with cameras covering every angle of the property. Over the next week, the security system proved its worth. I caught on camera 3 different occasions when someone drove slowly past my cabin, stopping to take photos. Each time it was Brenda's white Mercedes SUV. I forwarded the footage to Jim and to the sheriff's department. Jim called me the following Monday with an update. The district attorney is moving forward with charges against Brenda Matthews, breaking and entering, criminal trespass, and vandalism. They're offering her a plea deal if she removes the lien and pays restitution for damages. Is she taking it? Her lawyer is advising her to, but Brenda thinks she's untouchable. She's refusing to negotiate. So this goes to trial. Looks like it. And Scott, we're also filing a civil suit for damages, harassment, and emotional distress. Between the criminal case and the civil suit, the Matthews family is going to have a very expensive year. The preliminary hearing for the criminal charges was scheduled for 3 weeks later. During that time, I learned more about the Lake Martin Shores HOA and how it came to exist. It turned out that Brenda and Gerald had purchased a large parcel of lakefront property 2 years earlier with the intention of developing a gated community. When their development plans fell through due to environmental regulations and local opposition, they'd tried to form an HOA that would include existing properties around the lake, essentially forcing nearby homeowners to subsidize their failed investment through HOA fees and assessments. They'd managed to get a handful of neighbors to sign on, mostly people who didn't understand what they were agreeing to. Then they'd filed paperwork with the county, claiming the HOA covered a much larger area than it actually did. The county clerk who approved it hadn't properly vetted the documentation, assuming that if property owners were listed, they'd agreed to join. Jim discovered all of this through records requests and interviews with neighbors. Several other property owners came forward saying they'd also received violation notices at wrong addresses or had never received any notices at all. A few had actually paid fines to the HOA without realizing they weren't legally required to. This is a full-blown scam, Jim told me over lunch one afternoon. The Matthews family has collected over $100,000 in fees and fines from people who aren't even legally part of their HOA. Can we get the HOA dissolved? We're working on it. I've contacted the state attorney general's office. This could turn into a much bigger case. The preliminary hearing arrived. I sat in the courtroom gallery while the prosecutor, an assistant district attorney named Sarah Chen, presented the charges against Brenda Matthews. The evidence was overwhelming my testimony about finding her in my house, Deputy Chen's report, the photos, the security footage of her repeated drive-bys after the restraining order. Brenda's defense attorney, Patricia Holbrook, tried to argue that the HOA bylaws gave her client immunity for actions taken in her official capacity as HOA president. Judge Morrison, who was presiding over this hearing as well, shut that down immediately. Counselor, I'm not going to repeat myself. HOA bylaws do not supersede criminal law. Your client entered someone's home without permission and resided there. That's illegal. The defendant will be bound over for trial on all charges. Brenda looked shocked, as if she genuinely believed her HOA position would protect her from consequences. Gerald sat beside her, his face grim. After the hearing, Sarah Chen approached me in the hallway. Detective Novak, I want you to know we're taking this case very seriously. People need to understand that being on a homeowners association board doesn't give them the right to commit crimes. I appreciate that, I said. Do you think she'll take a plea now? Maybe. If not, we're prepared to go to trial. The evidence is solid. 2 days later, Jim called with news. Brenda took a plea deal. She's pleading guilty to criminal trespass and vandalism. The breaking and entering charge is being dropped as part of the agreement. What's her sentence? 6 months suspended sentence, 2 years probation, $5,000 in restitution to you, and she has to resign from the HOA board immediately. She's also prohibited from serving on any HOA board in Alabama for 10 years. It wasn't everything I'd hoped for, but it was something. What about the civil suit? That's still moving forward. We're also pursuing action to dissolve the Lake Martin Shores HOA entirely. The civil trial took place 4 months later. By that time, the state attorney general had launched a full investigation into the HOA's practices. 12 property owners had come forward with complaints. The county clerk who'd approved the HOA formation without proper vetting had been reprimanded. In the civil trial, Jim presented evidence of the harassment, the illegal entry, the damage to my property, and the emotional distress of finding someone living in my home. We asked for $50,000 in damages, plus attorney's fees. The Matthews family's defense was that they'd acted in good faith and that I was overreacting to what they characterized as a simple misunderstanding. Patricia Holbrook tried to paint me as vindictive, suggesting that as a law enforcement officer, I should have been more understanding of citizens trying to improve their community. That argument backfired spectacularly. The jury didn't appreciate the implication that cops should tolerate having their homes broken into as long as it's done by someone in a perceived position of authority. After 3 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. They found in my favor and awarded me $75,000 in damages, more than we'd asked for. The judge also ordered the Matthews family to pay all my attorney's fees, which had climbed to over $30,000. Outside the courthouse, Jim shook my hand. That's a solid win. What happens now with the HOA? The Attorney General's working on that. Based on what we've uncovered, I expect they'll order it dissolved and require restitution to everyone who paid fees or fines. A week later, the State Attorney General announced that the Lake Martin Shores HOA was being dissolved due to fraud. All fees and fines collected would be returned to property owners. Gerald and Brenda Matthews were banned from forming any HOA in Alabama and faced potential additional charges for fraud and racketeering. Several news outlets picked up the story. I gave a couple of interviews emphasizing that HOA boards don't have unlimited power and that people should always verify the legitimacy of any HOA before paying fees or accepting violation notices. The attention brought more victims forward. It turned out the Matthews family had run similar schemes in Georgia and Florida before moving to Alabama. Federal authorities got involved, and suddenly, Gerald and Brenda were facing much more serious charges. 6 months after I first found Brenda living in my cabin, I sat on my dock at Lake Martin watching the sunset over the water. The cabin was back to normal, the coral paint replaced with the original natural wood stain. The tacky decorations were long gone. My fishing trophies were back on display. I'd used some of the judgment money to make improvements. I'd actually wanted a new boat lift, updated kitchen appliances, and a screened porch overlooking the water. The security cameras remained, a reminder that sometimes the threat comes from the least expected direction. My phone rang. It was Captain Richards. "Scott, just wanted to let you know the feds just arrested Gerald and Brenda Matthews. Multiple counts of wire fraud, mail fraud, and racketeering. They're looking at serious prison time." I smiled. "Good. You started quite the domino effect with your case. The FBI has identified at least 7 other communities where they ran similar HOA scams. Victims total over $1 million. Glad I could help." After hanging up, I cracked open a beer and watched the last rays of sunlight paint the lake golden. A bass jumped near the dock, and I made a mental note to go fishing in the morning. The whole ordeal had been exhausting and infuriating, but in the end, justice had been served. Brenda Matthews had learned that being HOA president didn't put her above the law. Gerald had learned that his law degree couldn't protect him from federal prosecution when he was running a criminal enterprise. More importantly, dozens of other homeowners had gotten their money back and been freed from a fraudulent HOA. Several had reached out to thank me for fighting back when they'd been too intimidated or confused to do so themselves. I thought about all the people who faced HOA abuse every day, people who didn't have my resources or legal knowledge to fight back. The case had opened my eyes to how these organizations could be weaponized by petty tyrants who craved power over their neighbors. The next morning, I woke early and took my boat out onto the lake. The water was calm, the air cool and fresh. This was why I'd bought the cabin in the first place: peace, quiet, and the simple pleasure of being on the water. As I cast my line, I reflected on the past several months. The legal battles, the stress, the anger at having my sanctuary violated, but also the satisfaction of standing up for myself and inadvertently helping others. Sometimes fighting back against injustice meant months of court dates and legal fees. Sometimes it meant being stubborn when others would have just paid the extortion money to make the problem go away. I'd done the right thing, and in the process, I'd helped expose a significant fraud operation that had victimized dozens of people. That felt good in a way that solving cases as a detective felt good, bringing bad people to justice and helping victims. My line tugged, and I reeled in a nice-sized largemouth bass. I measured it, took a photo, and released it back into the lake. The sun climbed higher, warming my face. Later that afternoon, I got a call from Jim with final news about the Matthews family. Both Gerald and Brenda had been denied bond due to flight risk. They were sitting in federal custody awaiting trial. The evidence against them was overwhelming, and their attorneys were already floating the idea of plea deals. "How long do you think they'll get?" I asked. "Federal sentencing guidelines for this kind of fraud? Brenda is looking at 5 to 7 years. Gerald, as the primary architect of the scheme and as a lawyer who should have known better, could get 10 to 15. That seems appropriate. More than appropriate. They destroyed people's lives with these scams. Some of the victims are elderly folks on fixed incomes who paid thousands in bogus fines. One couple almost lost their home to a fraudulent lien. After that call, I spent the rest of the weekend at the cabin, doing some maintenance work I'd been putting off. I repaired some loose boards on the dock, cleaned the gutters, and organized my fishing gear. Normal, peaceful homeowner tasks. On Sunday evening, as I was packing up to head back to my apartment in Phoenix City, my neighbor from across the cove, an older gentleman named Robert, who I'd occasionally fished with, pulled up in his boat. "Scott, glad I caught you. I wanted to thank you for what you did with that HOA situation." "You're welcome, Robert. Did they try to rope you in too?" "They sent me violation notices about my dock and boathouse, said I owed them $8,000 in fines plus $2,000 for administrative costs. I ignored them because I knew I never signed up for any HOA, but they kept threatening legal action. After your case made the news, they stopped contacting me, and I just got a letter from the Attorney General saying I don't owe anything. I'm glad it worked out. You did a brave thing, standing up to them. A lot of folks around here were afraid of the legal costs of fighting back. You showed everyone that bullies can be beaten." We talked for a few more minutes before Robert headed back across the cove. His words stuck with me during the drive back to Phoenix City. I hadn't set out to be anyone's hero. I'd just been defending my own property and my own rights. But sometimes that's exactly what's needed, one person willing to stand up and fight, which gives others the courage to do the same. Work kept me busy over the next few weeks. I was assigned to investigate a string of home burglaries in the Phoenix City area, which required long hours and lots of surveillance work. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was investigating break-ins after being the victim of one myself. During this time, the federal case against Gerald and Brenda Matthews progressed. Both eventually took plea deals. Brenda got 6 years in federal prison plus restitution of over $400,000. Gerald got 12 years plus restitution of $1.2 million. The judge in their case specifically mentioned my situation during sentencing, calling their actions a brazen abuse of power and betrayal of community trust. I didn't attend their sentencing hearing. I'd moved on. Reading about it in the news was enough closure for me. Spring turned to summer, and I spent more weekends at the cabin. I'd started dating someone, a teacher named Amy Turner, who I'd met through mutual friends. She loved the cabin as much as I did, and we spent long weekends there, fishing and kayaking and just enjoying the quiet. One Saturday morning, about a year after the original incident, Amy and I were having coffee on the dock when she asked, "Do you ever think about what happened here with that HOA woman?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "Mostly I'm just grateful it's over." It's kind of crazy that she thought she could just move into your house. She was used to people being intimidated by her. She probably bullied dozens of people into paying bogus fines or doing work on their homes that wasn't necessary. I just happened to be someone who knew the law and had the resources to fight back. "Well, I'm glad you did. This place is perfect, and it would have been terrible if they'd gotten away with their scam." I looked around at the peaceful cove, the morning sun sparkling on the water, the trees thick with summer foliage. Yeah, it is perfect. That afternoon, we took the boat out and anchored in a quiet spot near the middle of the lake. Amy caught a huge catfish that put up a great fight. We laughed as she struggled to reel it in, and when she finally got it to the boat, we both cheered. It was moments like that, simple, joyful moments, that reminded me why I'd fought so hard to protect this place. As we headed back to the cabin at sunset, I thought about the journey from that shocking moment when I discovered Brenda living in my house to this peaceful summer evening. The legal battles, The stress, the anger, all of it had been worth it to preserve my sanctuary and help others in the process. The case had also taught me something about entitlement and power. Brenda Matthews had genuinely believed that her position as HOA president gave her the right to do whatever she wanted. She'd been so drunk on the small amount of power that came with the role that she'd lost all sense of boundaries and legality. And Gerald, who should have known better as an attorney, had been complicit in it all, probably seeing it as an easy way to extract money from people too intimidated to fight back. They'd both learned the hard way that no one is above the law. Not HOA presidents, not lawyers, not anyone. It was a lesson I'd spent my career as a detective teaching criminals, and it was satisfying to see it apply equally to white-collar criminals who thought they were too respectable to face consequences. Over the following months, I heard through various channels about other property owners around Lake Martin who'd been affected by the fake HOA. Most had gotten their money back. A few had filed their own lawsuits and won judgments. The whole community had come together in a way, united by their shared experience of being victimized and their shared satisfaction in seeing justice served. The next winter, I was promoted to sergeant at the sheriff's department. Captain Richards said, "My handling of the HOA situation, both legally and in terms of public relations, had demonstrated the kind of judgment and integrity the department valued. It felt good to be recognized, even though I'd just been doing what anyone should do, standing up for their rights." Amy and I got engaged that Christmas. I proposed at the cabin, on the dock where we'd spent so many peaceful mornings. She said yes without hesitation, and we immediately started making plans for a small wedding at the lake the following fall. As I write this, sitting on my porch at the cabin with a cup of coffee and the morning newspaper, I can honestly say that the whole nightmare experience with Brenda Matthews feels like it happened to someone else. Life has moved on. The cabin is mine, unencumbered by fake liens or fraudulent HOA claims. My career is thriving. My relationship with Amy is strong. Everything worked out. But I haven't forgotten the lessons learned. I keep copies of all the legal documents from the case in my files, and when I hear about friends or colleagues dealing with HOA issues, I share my story and offer advice. I've become something of an informal advocate for homeowner rights, helping people understand that they don't have to accept bullying from HOA boards and that there are legal remedies available. Last month, I ran into Patricia Holbrook, the lawyer who defended Brenda during the civil trial. We were both at the Russell County Courthouse for different matters, and we ended up sharing an elevator. "Detective Novak," she said, recognizing me. "Ms. Holbrook, I want you to know I felt terrible about representing Brenda Matthews in your case. Everything that came out afterward, the federal charges, all the victims, I had no idea the scope of what they were doing. You were just doing your job. Still, it bothers me. They deceived me as much as anyone else. I thought it was a simple HOA dispute, not part of a massive fraud scheme." The elevator reached my floor. As the doors opened, I turned back to her. "At least justice was served in the end." She nodded. "It was. And for what it's worth, you did the right thing fighting back. A lot of people would have just paid them off to make them go away." I thought about that conversation as I walked to my car. Patricia was right. Many people would have paid the money rather than endure months of legal battles. It would have been easier in the short term, but it would have been wrong, and it would have allowed the Matthews family to continue victimizing others. Sometimes doing the right thing is hard. It costs time and money and emotional energy. But the alternative, letting bullies and criminals win because fighting back is difficult, is unacceptable. I'd taken an oath as a law enforcement officer to uphold the law and protect people. That oath didn't just apply when I was on duty. It was a fundamental part of who I was. Amy and I got married last September in a beautiful outdoor ceremony by the lake. Friends, family, and colleagues from the sheriff's department attended. It was a perfect day, sunny but not too hot, with a gentle breeze rippling the water. We exchanged vows on the dock where I had proposed, and during the reception on the lawn of the cabin, several people mentioned the HOA story, joking that at least we didn't have to worry about getting violation notices for wedding decorations. We honeymooned in Colorado, spending a week hiking in the mountains and fishing in alpine streams. It was wonderful to get away and just focus on each other. But I was also happy to come home to Alabama, to our cabin on Lake Martin, to the place I'd fought so hard to protect. Now, almost 2 years after that shocking moment when I arrived home to find Brenda Matthews living in my cabin, life has settled into a comfortable rhythm. I work my shifts at the sheriff's department, solving crimes and keeping Russell County safe. Amy teaches her 5th grade class, shaping young minds and inspiring kids to love learning. And on weekends and days off, we retreat to our cabin, our sanctuary, our place of peace. The property looks better than ever. We've made thoughtful improvements over time: a fire pit for cool evenings, raised garden beds where Amy grows vegetables and herbs, a larger deck off the back of the cabin with built-in seating. None of these improvements were mandated by a HOA or done to satisfy someone else's arbitrary standards. They were all choices we made because we wanted them, because they enhanced our enjoyment of the property. That's what homeownership should be: the freedom to make choices about your own property within the bounds of law and basic community standards. Not being terrorized by power-hungry HOA boards imposing ridiculous rules and extortionate fines. I still keep up with news about HOA issues. It's become something of a passion of mine. I've testified before the state legislature twice now in support of bills to increase oversight of homeowners associations and strengthen protections for individual property owners. Some of that legislation has passed, including a law requiring HOAs to properly verify addresses before sending violation notices and prohibiting HOAs from entering private residences without explicit permission except in genuine emergencies. These reforms won't prevent every HOA abuse, but they'll help. And each small victory, each law that protects homeowners from overreaching boards, feels like an extension of my own fight against Brenda Matthews and her fraudulent Lake Martin Shores HOA. Gerald Matthews will be in federal prison for another decade. Brenda should be released in a few years, but she'll never again hold a position of power in any HOA. Their scheme has been thoroughly exposed, and their names have become cautionary tales in legal and homeowner communities across the Southeast. As for me, I'm exactly where I want to be, sitting on my dock at my cabin, watching the sunrise over Lake Martin, with my wife sleeping peacefully inside, my job secure, and my property unquestionably my own. The nightmare that began when I came home to find an HOA Karren living in my cabin feels like ancient history now, a story I tell at parties that always generates shocked reactions and knowing nods from anyone who's ever dealt with an overzealous HOA. The moral of the story, if there is one, is simple. Know your rights, stand up for yourself, and never let anyone, HOA president or otherwise, intimidate you into accepting what's wrong. Sometimes the fight is long and difficult, but principles matter. Justice matters. And your home, your sanctuary, your slice of peace in a chaotic world that's worth fighting for. I take a sip of coffee and watch a blue heron land gracefully on the dock's edge. Somewhere in the distance, a fish jumps, creating ripples that spread across the glassy surface of the lake. It's going to be a beautiful day. Just another perfect day at my cabin, the place Brenda Matthews tried to steal, but that remains firmly and legally mine. And that's exactly how it should be.